It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, a calm drive home after a long day at the hospital. The sky had turned amber, the city lights flickering alive as dusk settled. Malik Johnson, a young black doctor in his late 20s, leaned back in his seat, exhausted but proud. He had just completed a 12-hour shift in the emergency room, saving lives that blurred together in his memory. Yet, beneath the fatigue, there was a quiet joy, the satisfaction of finally living the dream he'd worked for since childhood. The road was nearly empty, the hum of the engine blending with soft jazz playing from the radio. He wore his white coat still, the stethoscope draped around his neck like a badge of purpose. It was a symbol of how far he had come, from a rough neighborhood where sirens were more common than lullabies, to a profession that demanded excellence and compassion. But that peace shattered the moment the red and blue lights flared behind him. Malik glanced in the rearview mirror, confusion tightening his chest. He hadn't been speeding, his registration was up to date. He was less than 5 minutes from home. Still, he pulled over, carefully signaling, his heartbeat quickening with the instinctive fear that came from too many stories that ended badly for men who looked like him. The police cruiser stopped behind him. The officer's flashlight cut through the darkness, slicing across Malik's face, his hands, his dashboard. In that moment, all his years of education, all his hard work, felt irrelevant. To the man behind that badge, Malik knew he was not Dr. Johnson. He was just another black man in a nice car. The officer's voice came sharp and cold. The questions were quick, suspicious, and unnecessary. Where was he going? Why was he in this neighborhood? Was the car his? Malik answered respectfully, showing his ID, his hospital badge, his license. But every word seemed to irritate the officer more, as if Malik's calm confidence was an insult. Soon, backup arrived. 2 more officers. The situation escalated. Malik was ordered out of the car. He was searched on the side of the road, the glare of headlights illuminating the humiliation. Passersby slowed down, staring. To them, it looked like another criminal caught. One officer, the lead, a man named Officer Reynolds, seemed determined to find something wrong. He rummaged through the car, ignoring Malik's pleas that there was nothing to find. When he discovered the hospital ID again, he sneered, questioning if it was real. It was only when a call came over his radio, a more serious incident nearby, that the officers finally let him go. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a curt order to watch yourself. Malik stood there for a moment, trembling in disbelief. The air felt heavy with shame and anger. He climbed back into his car, gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. For the first time, the world that he had believed he could change with education and effort felt unbearably cruel. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind replayed every detail. The condescension, the laughter from the backup officers, the disbelief in Reynolds' eyes when Malik said he was a doctor. It wasn't the first time Malik had felt the sting of prejudice, but it was the first time it had cut through his pride so sharply. He thought about his father, a quiet, proud man who had taught him to stay calm when faced with hate, to let success be the loudest answer. But in that moment, success felt hollow. Malik had done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. The next morning, he went to work with a forced smile, but the anger burned underneath. Every patient he treated, every life he saved, felt like a small act of defiance, proof that he was more than what Reynolds saw. Still, the memory lingered. The way people in power could strip away your dignity in seconds. The helplessness of knowing that one wrong move, one wrong word, could have changed everything. Weeks turned into months, and Malik buried the incident deep inside, convincing himself it was behind him. He poured his energy into his work, volunteering in low-income neighborhoods, mentoring young medical students, and earning recognition for his empathy and skill. But sometimes late at night, when he drove past the stretch of road where it happened, his heart still tightened. He wondered if Reynolds even remembered him, or if he was just another name, another face in a long list of routine stops. What Malik didn't know was that fate had a strange way of circling back. Life had a rhythm that always found balance, even if it took years to strike the right note. Because somewhere across the city, Officer Reynolds was living a very different life now. His career had begun to falter. Complaints had piled up, and one terrible night, a decision he made would bring him face to face with the same man he once humiliated, not on a street, but in a hospital emergency room. And this time, the power dynamic would be completely different. Years passed, and Malik Johnson's name became well known in the city's medical community. His steady hands and calm voice had saved countless lives, and his compassion had earned him a reputation beyond the hospital walls. He had risen to become the head of emergency medicine, a position of authority, respect, and influence. Yet even with all his achievements, the memory of that night on the roadside had never fully faded. It had simply buried itself deeper, like a scar that no one could see. Malik's days were long and demanding. He was the kind of doctor who never left early, who checked twice on every patient, who believed that the people society often ignored. The poor, the addicted, the broken, deserved the same care as anyone else. He had seen too much pain to allow judgment into his work. Still, every time a police officer came into the hospital, bringing in a suspect or a victim, he felt a quiet tension, a shadow of distrust that he hated but couldn't erase. It was late one Friday night when the call came in. A serious accident on the interstate. Multiple victims, one in critical condition. Malik's team prepared the trauma bay, running through their routine with practiced precision. The air filled with the beeping of monitors, the rolling of gurneys, and the soft murmur of nurses coordinating their stations. Minutes later, the ambulance doors burst open. The paramedics rushed in, shouting details over the chaos. The patient on the stretcher was a middle-aged man unconscious, bleeding heavily from a chest wound, his face pale and bloodied. His police uniform was torn, his badge barely hanging from the fabric. Malik moved instantly into action, barking instructions to his team, stabilizing the man's airway, checking vitals, ordering blood transfusions. It was muscle memory, pure professionalism, detached and precise. But as the nurse cleaned the patient's face, Malik froze. Beneath the bruises and the blood, a flash of recognition hit him like a punch to the chest. It was him, Officer Reynolds, the same man who had humiliated him on the side of the road years ago. For a brief second, Malik felt his heart stop. His hands hovered in the air, trembling. Time seemed to slow, the sounds around him fading into a dull echo. The image of flashing red and blue lights of being ordered out of his car came flooding back. For that instant, the irony was unbearable. The man who had once looked at him with contempt was now helpless before him, his life literally in Malik's hands. The thought flickered, quiet, dangerous, human. A question that tempted the edges of his conscience: why should I save him? But then, Malik took a deep breath. Years of training, years of compassion, years of discipline pushed the bitterness away. He steadied himself, eyes narrowing in focus. Whatever Reynolds had done, Malik was not going to be defined by hate. Not tonight. He went to work with renewed intensity. The wound was deep, a gunshot that had punctured the lung. The officers who had brought Reynolds in stood nearby, anxious and pale. Malik ignored them. Every second mattered. He led the team through the procedure, his voice calm but firm, guiding each movement like a conductor of a life or death symphony. The operation lasted for hours. Blood, sutures, adrenaline, a blur of motion. By dawn, when the sky turned pale and silent, Reynolds was alive. Barely, but alive. As Malik stripped off his gloves, exhaustion hit him in waves. He looked at the unconscious man lying on the table, the same one who had once questioned his worth as a human being, and felt an ache deep inside. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was something more complicated. The quiet power of knowing that compassion could overcome cruelty. The nurses watched Malik in awe, sensing something deeper in his silence. When one of them asked if he knew the patient, Malik simply nodded and said it was long story. Over the next few days, Reynolds remained in critical condition. Malik checked on him personally, ensuring that he got the best care possible. The staff didn't question it. They had seen Malik's dedication before, though never quite this personal. When Reynolds finally regained consciousness, confusion clouded his eyes. The first face he saw was Malik's, calm, professional, and unflinching. Recognition dawned slowly. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, perhaps in his entire career, the officer who had once held power over others now felt truly powerless. Malik nodded slightly, his expression unreadable, and told him he was lucky to be alive. There was no anger in his tone, just truth. Reynolds tried to speak again to apologize, but his voice broke. Malik didn't wait for words. He simply turned and walked away, leaving the officer to sit with the weight of what had just unfolded. In the hallway, Malik stopped for a moment, staring out the hospital window. The city stretched out beneath him, alive, complicated, full of contradictions. He thought about justice, about how it sometimes came not with punishment but with grace. Still, something inside him remained unsettled. Saving Reynolds had brought closure, yes, but it also reopened a wound he thought had healed. He wondered what would happen next, if Reynolds would try to make amends, or if he would fade back into his old ways. Little did Malik know, this was only the beginning, because what happened next would test not only his forgiveness, but his integrity, his reputation, and everything he had built. The hospital buzzed as usual in the following weeks, but for Malik Johnson, a quiet tension hung in the air. Invisible, yet suffocating, he had saved Officer Reynolds' life, performed the surgery flawlessly, and ensured every detail of his recovery was handled with care. It should have been a closed chapter, one act of mercy against years of bitterness. Yet, something inside him refused to rest. Each day, Malik passed by Reynolds' room during his rounds. The officer was healing slowly, his color returning, his movements cautious. When their eyes met, Reynolds would hold his gaze as if wanting to say something that never came. Perhaps guilt kept him silent. Perhaps shame. Malik didn't ask. He had already given him what he didn't deserve, his life back. But whispers had started to spread through the hospital halls. At first, they were faint, idle curiosity among the nurses and interns. "Isn't it strange?" someone said. "Ducker." Johnson seemed awfully invested in that police officer's recovery. Then came the rumors that maybe Malik knew the patient from before. That maybe there was more to the story. In a workplace where reputation was everything, whispers had a way of growing claws. Malik ignored them at first. He buried himself in work, focusing on his patients. But then came the complaint. One morning, his supervisor, Dr. Howard, called him into his office. The expression on Howard's face was grave, the kind that meant something serious had reached the administration's ears. Malik sat down, confused but calm. On the desk lay a printed letter, an official report filed anonymously, claiming that Malik had acted unprofessionally. During Officer Reynolds' surgery, it accused him of neglecting ethical standards and endangering the patient through bias. The words were heavy, poisonous, and absurd. Malik's stomach turned. He read the letter twice, unable to believe it. Someone, or several people, had twisted the story. What was once an act of compassion had been reshaped into something malicious. Dr. Howard sighed deeply, explaining that the hospital had no choice but to launch an internal review. Malik was suspended pending investigation. The room spun. Suspended. After everything he had done, after years of dedication and sacrifice, his entire career was being questioned, because he had saved the wrong man. As Malik walked out of the office, the stares followed him. Some sympathetic, some judgmental, some curious. He had been here before, in a different form. Years ago, it had been on the roadside, under flashing lights. Now it was in a sterile hallway, under fluorescent bulbs. Different place, same prejudice. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had once treated him like a criminal had now become the cause of his professional downfall. Even unintentionally. Reynolds was discharged 2 days later. Malik wasn't allowed to see him, not that he planned to. But what he didn't know was that Reynolds had overheard what had happened. The guilt that had been festering inside him began to eat away at what little pride he had left. At home, Malik sat in silence, his apartment dark except for the faint glow of the city outside. His medical degrees hung neatly on the wall, silent witnesses to the life he had built. Now, they felt like distant memories. He thought about his mother. Her words when he got accepted into medical school. "You'll have to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good." He thought about how he had laughed then, thinking those days of blatant discrimination were fading. But here he was, living proof that success didn't shield you from prejudice. It only made it quieter, more insidious. Days turned into weeks. Malik's name circulated in the hospital gossip chain. Some colleagues believed the accusations, others defended him quietly but feared speaking too loudly. Then, one afternoon, a knock came at his door. It was Officer Reynolds. He looked older, frailer, the hospital wristband still on his arm. His eyes were red as if he hadn't slept in days. Malik didn't say a word. Reynolds spoke slowly, apologetically. He explained that he had learned about the suspension and that it was wrong. He admitted he had once profiled Malik years ago. He admitted the shame that had haunted him ever since that night. And now, the weight of being saved by the very man he'd once degraded was unbearable. He offered to go to the hospital administration to tell the truth, that Malik had been nothing but professional, that he had saved his life without hesitation. But Malik knew it wouldn't be easy. Systems that protected prejudice didn't crumble with a single confession. Still, Reynolds insisted. He promised to clear Malik's name. That evening, Malik watched him leave, wondering if he could really trust the man who had once nearly destroyed him. But what choice did he have? The next morning, Reynolds made good on his word. He went to the hospital board, submitted a full statement, and demanded that the accusations against Malik be withdrawn. He confessed his history with Malik, exposing his own past misconduct. But it was too late to stop the storm. The hospital's investigation had already drawn attention from the media. A leaked report turned Malik's case into a headline: "Doctor accused of bias in police surgery." His reputation was shredded overnight. Outside his apartment, reporters gathered, asking if he had let prejudice cloud his medical judgment. The irony was unbearable. Yet amid the chaos, one thing became clear: Reynolds' confession wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something larger, because his statement had triggered an internal review of the police department as well. A chain reaction that began exposing years of complaints, misconduct, and racial bias. The same system that had once protected Reynolds was now turning against him. And in that unraveling, Malik would soon find an unexpected chance not just for justice, but for redemption. The city's morning news cycle erupted like wildfire. Screens across cafes, waiting rooms, and office lobbies flashed headlines that seemed too surreal to be true. Police officer confesses to racial profiling. Says doctor he once targeted saved his life. Hospital under fire after suspending black doctor over false bias allegations. For Malik Johnson, the world he had tried to quietly rebuild was now on full public display. Every outlet wanted his side of the story. Cameras camped outside his apartment. Social media split into camps, those who saw him as a hero and those who accused him of seeking fame. But Malik didn't want fame, he wanted peace. The hospital had reinstated him, not out of fairness, but fear. Reynolds' confession had gone viral, and the administration was desperate to save face. They issued a public statement, calling the situation a misunderstanding, and praised Malik's exemplary service and professionalism. But the damage was already done. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere had shifted. Some colleagues avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their silence when Malik had been suspended. Others approached him with awkward sympathy, telling him they always believed in him. The words felt hollow. Malik returned to his work quietly, but the weight of it all pressed against him. The trauma of humiliation, the false accusations, and now the spotlight. It was too much. Saving lives was supposed to bring him meaning, but lately it only reminded him of how fragile his own peace was. Meanwhile, Officer Reynolds was facing his own reckoning. His confession had ignited an investigation into the police department's history of racial profiling. Old complaints resurfaced. Former victims came forward. The same media that once glorified law enforcement now dissected every ugly truth they had buried. Reynolds' name became synonymous with the problem he represented. But strangely, the man didn't run from it. He faced it. He gave interviews admitting his prejudice, exposing the culture of silence within his department. He talked about Malik, not as a token of guilt, but as proof that redemption was possible. For Malik, watching those interviews stirred complicated emotions. Part of him admired the honesty. Another part resented how Reynolds' confession had become a story of his growth, while Malik was once again forced to carry the weight of someone else's sins. One night, Malik sat in his office long after the last patient had gone home. The hospital was silent except for the distant hum of machinery. On his desk sat a stack of letters, some from strangers thanking him for his strength, others from young students of color who said his story gave them hope. He read one of them. A short note from a high school student who wrote, "I want to be a doctor like you. They say people like me can't make it, but you proved them wrong." The words broke something open in him. The pain, the anger, the exhaustion, it all came pouring out. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. Not because of what had been done to him, but because of what he had survived. A few weeks later, a community organization invited Malik to speak at a public forum about racial inequality in the justice and healthcare systems. He hesitated at first. He wasn't a speaker, just a doctor. But when he stood on that stage looking out at hundreds of faces, young, old, hopeful, the words came naturally. He spoke about what it felt like to be judged for your skin instead of your skill. About the quiet pain of discrimination that seeps into your spirit. About the choice between anger and integrity, and how sometimes compassion is the greatest form of revenge. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. For the first time, Malik didn't feel like a victim of injustice. He felt like the architect of change. Across town, Reynolds watched the speech from his living room. His face was drawn, his career gone, but something in him had softened. He knew he could never undo what he had done, but perhaps his downfall could serve as a warning to others. He picked up the phone and dialed Malik's office. The call went unanswered, but he left a message, a quiet, heartfelt apology. Not for forgiveness, but for accountability. Weeks later, the police department announced new reforms: anti-bias training, independent oversight, and community-led accountability boards. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Malik, however, wasn't celebrating yet. He knew real change came slowly, through persistence, not press conferences. But as he stood outside the hospital one evening, watching the sunset reflect off the city's skyline, he felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him. Peace. And yet, peace was fragile. Because just when Malik thought the past was behind him, an unexpected event would pull him right back into the heart of controversy. One that would test everything he believed about justice, forgiveness, and the thin line between right and wrong. Months passed. The city had moved on to new headlines, but Malik Johnson's name still lingered in the public consciousness. Half legend, half symbol. For many, he was the man who turned injustice into integrity. For others, just another reminder of uncomfortable truths they wanted to forget. Life slowly returned to normal. Malik focused on his patients, his community programs, and mentoring underprivileged students who dreamed of careers in medicine. On the surface, he had found balance again, but deep inside, he still carried the scars of what had happened. Every time a police siren wailed in the distance, he felt a pang. Not of fear, but memory. Every time he looked at his white coat, he remembered how quickly it could be stripped of meaning in the wrong person's eyes. He had promised himself to move forward, to leave the past buried. But fate wasn't finished testing him. It happened on a rainy evening in late autumn. Malik was scheduled for an overnight shift at the hospital. A quiet one, he hoped. The ER had been unusually calm, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. Then the doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in, pushing a stretcher with a middle-aged woman, unconscious, pale, unresponsive. The lead nurse called out details, her voice tense: heart failure, unknown cause, no ID on her. Malik sprang into action. He worked swiftly, coordinating his team with practiced calm. But as they stabilized her vitals and removed her jacket to attach the monitor pads, something fell out of her pocket, a folded piece of paper soaked from the rain. One of the nurses picked it up, handed it to Malik. He unfolded it, and his heart sank. It was a family photo. The woman in the picture, smiling beside a man Malik instantly recognized. Officer Reynolds. The shock rippled through him. He looked down at the woman, Reynolds' wife. For a moment, he froze. Of all the people who could have ended up in his emergency room, fate had sent her. The irony was almost cruel, but instinct took over. Malik pushed aside every thought and focused. The woman's pulse was fading. He ordered the defibrillator, started compressions, and led his team with unwavering precision. It was a long, grueling effort, but slowly, her heart began to beat again. Hours passed before she was stabilized and transferred to intensive care. Malik stood by the bed, drenched in sweat, staring at the woman he had just pulled back from the brink of death. And then, through the glass of the ICU doors, he saw him, Officer Reynolds. The man looked older, thinner, burdened by something heavier than guilt. He stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief as he realized who was standing by his wife's bedside. Their eyes met for the second time since the night of the confession. No words passed between them, only silence heavy with history. Later that night, as the storm raged outside, Reynolds approached Malik in the hallway. His face was drawn, his voice trembling. He thanked Malik for saving his wife. His words were simple, but his eyes told a deeper story. The recognition that this man had now saved his family twice. For Reynolds, it was no longer about guilt. It was about grace. He confessed that since his public disgrace, his life had fallen apart. He had lost his job, his pension, and the respect of his peers. But in the midst of that fall, he had found something unexpected: perspective. He now worked with community organizations, advocating for reform, using his story as a warning to others. He said Malik's compassion had changed him, that without it, he might never have seen the truth of what he'd become. Malik listened quietly, his expression calm. He didn't need to hear apologies anymore. He had learned that forgiveness wasn't something you gave for others. It was something you gave to free yourself. But the encounter stirred something deeper. For all Reynolds' remorse, Malik knew the scars of racism didn't heal with a single redemption arc. They were generational, systemic, embedded in the structure of power itself. And while Reynolds had faced his fall, many others still walked freely, unaccountable. That night, Malik sat alone in the hospital chapel. The silence was comforting. He thought of his parents, of the lessons they had taught him. That true justice wasn't vengeance, but the courage to keep choosing integrity in a world that often rewarded cruelty. He realized he had been fighting his whole life, not just against prejudice, but against the bitterness it tried to plant in him. When dawn broke, he stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear again. In the days that followed, Reynolds' wife recovered slowly. Each morning, Malik checked in on her quietly, professionally. He didn't stay long. He didn't need to one afternoon. As he walked through the hospital lobby, he saw Reynolds waiting by the entrance. The man held a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, a donation to Malik's youth mentorship program, with a message that read simply, "Thank you for saving more than my life." Malik nodded, accepting it without a word. He knew this wasn't the end of their story, but perhaps, finally, the end of the pain that had bound them both. Yet as he stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed with a call from a journalist. The city council was forming a new committee to address racial bias in law enforcement and public institutions. They wanted Malik to serve as an advisor. He hesitated, staring at the hospital floor beneath his shoes. He had never seen himself as an activist, but maybe this was the next step, to turn pain into purpose. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and in that moment Malik knew. This was his calling. Months after the committee's formation, the city was changing. Not perfectly, not completely, but visibly. Posters that once carried hollow slogans about unity now displayed real initiatives. Police officers were being retrained. Community leaders were being heard, and in the center of it all stood Dr. Malik Johnson, the man who had once been mistaken for a suspect, now sitting across from mayors, judges, and department heads as a voice of moral authority. He hadn't asked for this spotlight, but it had found him anyway. Every meeting, every speech, every interview, Malik carried the weight of every person who had ever been silenced, humiliated, or profiled because of the color of their skin. He didn't speak for himself anymore. He spoke for them. For his father, who'd been pulled over too many times to count. For the young men who still flinched when they saw flashing lights. For the children growing up believing they had to be twice as good to be treated half as fair. The first months were turbulent. There were those who accused him of pushing an agenda, those who dismissed his experiences as isolated incidents. But Malik refused to respond with anger. His calm unnerved them. His evidence dismantled their excuses. And slowly the truth began to sink in. The system wasn't broken, it had been built this way. And now, people were finally listening. Officer Reynolds, too, found his way back, not to the force, but to something better. He began volunteering in schools, mentoring young cadets, teaching them about empathy, restraint, and accountability. His story, once one of shame, became a lesson in transformation. The two men crossed paths often, not as enemies or even as friends, but as two souls forever linked by a night that had changed them both. There was respect now, silent but sincere. One morning, Malik received a letter from Reynolds. It wasn't an apology this time. It was an invitation to speak together at a police academy graduation. Reynolds wrote that if change was truly possible, it had to start at the beginning, with those who'd sworn to protect, but had to learn first how to see. Malik hesitated at first. The thought of standing before a room full of officers stirred every memory of fear and humiliation. But he knew the only way forward was through. The day of the ceremony arrived. The hall was packed. Fresh graduates sat upright in polished uniforms, eyes bright with anticipation. Their families filled the back rows, proud and hopeful. Reynolds spoke first. He didn't sugarcoat his past. He told them who he had been, a man blinded by bias, convinced of his own righteousness. He described the night that shattered his illusion, and the man whose grace had forced him to confront himself. Then he turned to Malik. The room fell silent as Malik took the podium. His presence commanded attention, not through authority, but through quiet power. He spoke not as a victim, but as a witness to the cost of prejudice and the possibility of redemption. He told them that justice wasn't just about enforcing laws. It was about protecting dignity. That empathy wasn't weakness. It was the foundation of true strength. That one moment of bias could destroy a life, but one act of courage could rebuild it. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then, one by one, the new officers stood and applauded. Some with tears in their eyes, some with understanding dawning for the first time. Reynolds met Malik's gaze across the stage. In that moment, the past no longer bound them. It had transformed them. Later that evening, Malik walked through the city streets, the same ones where years ago he had been stopped, humiliated, and made to feel less than human. Now, the streetlights glowed softly on the pavement, and the air carried a quiet peace. He passed the corner where it had all begun and paused for a moment, hands in his coat pockets. He thought of how far he had come, from anger to forgiveness, from victimhood to leadership. Life had come full circle. He smiled to himself as a young boy on a bicycle rode by, waving at him. The boy wore a small badge on his backpack, a sticker from one of Malik's mentorship programs that read, "See me as I am." Malik watched the boy disappear down the block, the wheels spinning faster, the future rolling forward. That night, as Malik returned home, he found another envelope on his doorstep. Inside was a small, framed photo, the same one he had seen years ago fall from Mrs. Reynolds' jacket. This time, it was accompanied by a note in careful handwriting. "You saved my family, and in doing so, you saved me. I hope this reminds you that change is real. Because you made it happen." Malik placed the photo on his desk beside a framed diploma and a small bronze statue awarded to him for community service. But the objects didn't matter. What mattered was the journey they represented. He had faced prejudice, he had confronted hate, and he had chosen compassion. Not because it was easy, but because it was powerful. In the end, he didn't just heal wounds. He built bridges. The man who was once profiled now shaped policy. The cop who once abused authority now taught accountability. And a city once divided had begun slowly but surely to heal. As Malik gazed out the window, the city lights shimmered against the night sky. Somewhere in that glow, he felt his father's spirit, proud at peace. And for the first time in years, Malik allowed himself to rest.